Welcome to Brilliant, everyone. I've got somebody you're going to want to listen to. In fact, go pick up his book, Anointed, Toby Stuart. I just wrapped that book up about right before Christmas, and man, you will want to read that 2 times. Here's what I thought, Toby. First off, thank you for doing this. But man, I thought this is absolutely one of the most relevant books we can read in the world we're in right now because we are dominated by people that are anointed through social media. That's the first thing I thought. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, you name it, right? We're anointing people through an algorithm made by other people and machines. What do you think?
I mean, I think I don't want to talk. I just want to listen.
Buy your own book on
I already,
Audible.
I already love you for that introduction, and keep going.
Dude.
um, but yeah, absolutely. We live in a world of the anointed, no doubt about it. I think you can never like actually quite measure these things, but I think you could make the argument that the phenomena that I write about in the book are even more relevant today than they have been at any point in the past. Um, that's but they're always relevant. I mean, it's just status dynamics and anointment are part of the human condition. We've done it from the beginning, and we're doing it now, and we're going to keep doing it.
Here's what I found the most interesting about your book. I was texting, by the way, I was texting all my friends, being like, hey, check out this clip. Hey, check this out. I found it relevant in every aspect of my life. Like, I had to think through business, I had to think through social media, I had to think through family. And I'm like, wait, even in a small dynamic like a family setting, there are anointed, right? And
Absolutely.
I thought,
Absolutely.
how can we go ahead? Sorry.
No, no, no. I mean, I don't want to talk. I still want to listen. You're summarizing the book, and the advertisement's better than I
Ah,
could
you're
do it.
funny, man.
So I'm
You're
just
funny.
going to listen.
I thought with anointing people. First of all, when I first read the title and then I read the subtitle, I thought first, is this going to be somewhat of a religious book? That's the first thing I thought of. But then as I got to reading it, subtitle, The Extraordinary Effects of Social Status in a Winner Take Most World. I think it was clearly about the influence in a world that's very unfair. I mean, we're broken, right? In the way that we choose people, in the way that people are chosen to lead. And then I couldn't stop thinking at the end, Toby, as I'm like wrapping around and I'm going back and reflecting, I'm like, man, like politics, like this is like we're ruled by this exact same thing. And there's only so much we can do, right? And where do you start when you think of politics and anointment?
Well, let me come to that. I mean, I don't like to think about politics today, to be honest, but I mean, I do all the time. But but let me come to that. Let me first just kind of walk back through what you just said. I do really love it. It's a great description of the book. So one of the meta points is that this phenomenon of social status and status dynamics, they appear in all walks of life, like in all walks of life. So in every group setting, and even in some sense when you're on your own, because when you're on your own, you're often thinking about status dynamics, like you're processing them in your head. But in every group setting, whether it's the workplace or a group of friends or an economic marketplace of any kind, or even a family, there are status dynamics at work in the background. And a major point of the book is, we all need to understand these. We don't think about them enough. Like they're not necessarily intuitive, but they're ubiquitous. And so that was why I wrote the book. Um, Funny enough, the title had a lot to do with it. So it was actually I decided to write the book. I mean, never writing a book when you're an academic and and particularly an overworked one, is a tough decision because it's like it's going to take a ton of time, and where are you going to find the time, and like at what point in my career should I do this? And I'd love to write, so I've always thought about doing it, but I was actually taking a walk one day in COVID, and that kind of one of those death by silence kinds of walks, that where I was like, walking a beach in Southern California for the 425th time, socially distancing myself in nature, if you remember those days. Not so long ago, and the title popped into my head. And when I thought of the title, I'm like, well, I got to do it. But there is an Anointed definitely has, like, it is, and I just like, there's literally a page about this in the book, but there's of course biblical anointment. Um, but the idea is that um, in all walks of life, we have this experience where status is bequeathed upon us by somebody else in the smallest to the largest ways, right? I mean, it could be biblical anointment. It could be, you are. I mean, I'm a professor at UC Berkeley at the moment, so I'll stick with that one. But I've been at a lot of really good universities. So you're like walking across the stage at graduation. The university issues you a degree. It's in a much more sort of in a smaller sense. You're anointed, right? You had one status the day before, the day after. You are a graduate. You hold a diploma. That gives you a different status in life. You've been anointed. But the same thing happens, and I often say this about status dynamics, is like if you go to a middle school playground, it all unfolds there. Like everything you need to know about status, like it happens on a playground somewhere. But you're like, you're the not so popular kid, and as I was, and the cool one kind of comes over and sits next to you and isn't an asshole. And like that little gesture is itself, a tiny act of anointment, right? Like for a moment, you're like, yeah, I'm in this club. And other people see you and they're like, yeah, he's in this club for a minute, but for a hot second. Politics and anointment. I mean, all through the process, right? So it's just like, there's this whole kind of process of how candidates come to be, which is interesting unto itself. But candidates are anointed inside of parties, right? And then politicians are, and we're learning every day how much politicians are kingmakers. Like we never even knew. I think in comparison to what we're seeing these days.
Hell no. I had
So
no clue. I had no clue,
no
man.
clue. No clue. You would have thought I mean, I guess I have spent much of my last 6 months or year, I guess now more than a year, reappraising the institutions of democracy, and going back to like my high school civics class, thinking,
That's so
mm,
funny.
I wish I could go back and talk to him again because he got a lot of shit wrong. It turns out.
That's so
So,
true. It's
so
interesting in
all
that dynamic that you're talking about when the anointed are are seen a different way, right? They're given more, they're given more leniency, grace. You mentioned something right now, which is like the anointed are kingmakers; they can choose others. The dynamic that happens also in the playground, when you were saying the playground, is that an anointed person can go to somebody who's like kind of on the side, kicked out, and they're feeling like, oh, I hate that guy, the anointed one. But then the anointed one comes over and it's like, hey, you want to play? It's like all of a sudden it's like, oh, I like you. Like, thank you for including me in this. It changes the dynamic. And we see that in politics too, everywhere, right? And I thought that was interesting.
and this is the book. So the book really goes across many, many, many different contexts. But let me give you a couple others. Um, it's if you're going to write about status, you are quickly going an anointment. You're going to quickly get into the cultural markets. So like markets like literature or writing, books, art, wine, right? These are products that are of deeply ambiguous quality, a deeply ambiguous quality. So I've spent the better part of an adult life drinking a fair bit of wine. I mean, not too much, but enough. And to this day, I don't consider myself a good judge of the quality of a bottle of wine. Like, I need help. And if somebody tells me that I am drinking a bottle and it's rated 100, I'm literally going to respond to that, literally physically differently than if I'm drinking a bottle that I think is 88. And by think, I mean exactly that. Like, I can't tell. So, they're the same to me. Like, I can tell they're different, but I can't tell you like this one's better, this one's worse. I can just tell you like this one is different from this one. And so in these kinds of markets, king making is enormously important. So you could think of the role the book writes a little bit about. I write a little bit about a guy called Robert Parker, who was the most important wine critic ever, and he literally, if he designated a bottle of wine to be a high number, he first invented the kind of 1 to 100 rating scale. But when he says this is a 97 or a 98 or a 99 or a 100, the value of that bottle might quadruple. It might go up by a factor of 10 literally overnight, just because somebody whose opinion we trust anointed it. For reasons we don't need to get into, I spent a week in December deeply involved in an art gallery, and I won't say any more than that. But this particular gallerist is had a 40-50 year run in the art world, has been enormously successful at choosing artists who go on to then have successful careers. So this gallerist, when he decides to find like a young artist and hang a painting on the wall, all of a sudden the painting is worth much more than it was the day before. And so there are Kingmaker. So there are many, many contexts in which people who already have high status have the power to anoint, and that creates massive overnight shifts in value. So you could think about the Pulitzer Prize in literature, or the Booker Prize in literature, or just a gallerist putting a painting on the wall, or an influential movie critic saying this is the independent film you need to see versus that one. And these are state changes, literally like overnight state changes in the value that we assign to a product. But the critical thing in the book, and we should come back and think through this one a little bit more as we go through our conversation today. But the critical thing in the book is it's the product itself is identical the moment before and the moment after the Kingmaker anoints it. So if a bottle of wine exists, when Robert Parker would anoint a bottle of wine, it existed like a minute before that happened, and it exists a minute after. It is the identical bottle of wine, identical. But its value in the eyes of the consumer shifts radically in that one instant of anointment.
You know, I was thinking this when I was reading those parts of your book, because you referenced that in different ways just to make the point come across easier for the reader. And I think you did a great job. I kept thinking, when I go to visit a website for almost any great product, you always see a review, right? And usually it's someone that other people recognize, right? The anointer. It's like, hey, this anointer said this anointer said that. What other ways do you think companies do a really good job of bridging that gap so it makes the decision easier for the consumer?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and so one of my favorites is, I mean, you probably already sorted this out about me from our very brief conversation about politics, but the newspaper I tend to read is the New York Times. So I read the Times. I mean, I read the Journal as well, but I read the Times more than any other than any other newspaper. So the Times has Wirecutter, right? And you've seen these Wirecutter reviews, and you're like, okay, it's the New York Times, it's Wirecutter. Like, I trust this. Like, if you're a Times reader, then you trust the Times. Like, that's kind of what you do. I mean, maybe over time become a little bit less skeptical, and that I'm a little more skeptical of what I read in the Times, and that has to do with I think this insane polarization that we've seen in the media world. So now, whether it's right or left, you probably can imagine that the facts are somewhere, you know, generally a little bit different from as reported on Times these days, literally on both sides of the political aisle today. I think that happens. But the Wirecutter, if you notice, when they recommend a product, you're offered a link to the product.
Yes.
And guess what?
What?
You're paid.
Hmm.
So all of these like review sites, nearly all of them are in some affiliate programs where you're paid for the link. Right. And so we read these recommendations, we think because they're associated with somebody we trust. In my case, it's the New York Times. Now all of a sudden, like we think better of the product. I mean, I was just doing it. I'm in this apartment that I'm new to, and I need to buy bed sheets. Like, I mean, I hate decisions like that. Like, there's like, what the hell do you even do? There's like,
I wouldn't know, man, but that's
I
good.
mean, I mean, it's like the worst kind of decision, right? Because there's an endless night. You just can't end. I mean, there's so many of them, and the price gradient is wide. Like, there's some really expensive bed sheets, and there's some dirt cheap ones, and everything in between. So, and then how much of your time, and this is another point in the book, but how much of your time do you really want to spend sorting that one out? I mean, I've probably already wasted a half hour on bed sheets, and I still got 2 hours to go before I get so frustrated. I say F it. But like when you find that Wirecutter review and it says XYZ, you're like, okay, boom, done.
That makes sense, and, I mean, it also makes sense how we go to Amazon, we typically go to the 5-star section, and then we read the 1 stars, like, are they how stupid are the 1 stars? Are they real or are they idiots, right? And then we're like, "Okay, got it. It was good. 5 stars, let's go." Made it so much easier.
So Amazon is like the most amazing commerce engine. Like, it's so brilliant in so many ways, but like the whole thing is designed, to get you focused and bring you to a decision. So you're looking at those reviews as another sign. I mean, the whole reason we have these recommendation systems is because we live in a world in which we're overwhelmed with choice. Right? It's endless. And what Amazon doesn't want is you spending 25 hours scrolling through 9,000 pages of sheets. Like, they don't actually want you to do that. One, because it's a bad experience, and eventually you'll just say, I can't do that anymore. It's better to go to Target or whatever, and just get it done. It'll be time savings. And so they're always thinking about and looking at ways, often ways in which they're paid, right? Because they have paid placement on Amazon as well, to focus your attention on something and then give it that little dash of anointment so that it brings you to a decision instead of leaves you just like bewildered by what we might call the paradox choice, or the overabundance choice. So the whole commerce world is designed to do that. Companies do this all the time. I mean, when I think about Anointment, it is the cousin of Anointment is Endorsements. Endorsements is just almost a synonym for the concept. So when I think about products, I mean, it's my age, but I'll never stop thinking about Michael Jordan and Nike. you know it's like, I'm aging myself. I was also a professor at the University of Chicago between 95 and 2004-ish. So that was the era of the Bulls, right? And so, but like, there are endless ways in which, all brands are forms of anointment, but the companies who use athlete endorsements, are maybe front and center of my mind, and sort of using these status dynamics to go and to create a feeling of identification, and interest around a product. Of course, you could also take the whole luxury goods market, because that's all, I mean, that's all about status.
That is 100% about status. Like you said earlier, it's like, listen, just because somebody put a number on the wine, it doesn't make it any different. It still tastes the same before and after. Now I look at it differently. You changed that, which is crazy.
Right. I mean, and think about a handbag, like it's the brand on the handbag, right? It's the same concept.
So, how do we how do we play along with this, man? How do we maneuver through this so that we can end up like so we can have the advantage, so that we can somewhat be anointed or be towards the top of this? How do we go through this?
So there's kind of there's maybe two questions there, and let me two really really different questions, that I think you're getting at. So one is there is there a way out of this? So is there a way for us to not fall into this world in which we're using status as a shortcut to navigate our worlds? And my response to that in the book is, well, a little bit, be careful what you wish for. So, like, I kind of wish I didn't know that the Wirecutter is basically some version of paid reviews, right? I mean, I'm sure there's some vetting in this. I'm sure if the product is awful, the Wirecutter is not going to put up a link to it. But and by the way, Consumer Reports, by contrast, is real reviews, and if you pay for that, you actually get unvarnished reviews. Um, and there are lots of companies that kind of understand that this is the way the world works, and they play a curatorial role. Basically, like, they work hard to identify high quality products and then present you with a choice set where part of what you're paying for is, like, they've done the hard work of screening. So, like, maybe my favorite example of that is Costco, which has really done this exceptional job over the years of screening on product quality, and generally putting high quality merchandise into their stores. And so that's kind of one of the services you get from Costco. But the general point in the book is, maybe be careful what you wish for, because if you don't have the Wirecutter, or you don't have some version of product reviews, right, then how are you actually going to get to a choice? And that extends way beyond just, like, we could think about this as, like, products in a store. We could think about this as, like, what art you want to see in a museum. We could think about this as what book you want to read. Like, imagine walking into a bookstore with no idea. Okay, so it's take away, right. Take away all status markers. Like, remove the blurbs from the covers. Remove the little stickers that says this
No
one.
bestsellers, right?
No
No front
bestseller.
row.
No
Yeah.
front tables. Just, like,
Yeah.
straight alphabetized. I mean, I can tell you that in that world, there is one book you would pick over all others, and that is Anointed. But that's only because it has an absolutely beautiful.
With letter
That's
A.
only because it's letter A, and the cover art is exceptional. So, I
It
mean, so
is.
it
It's
was like,
funny.
okay, if I don't know if I can write a good book, but I'm determined to create one that looks good on the shelf. So a lot of thought went into how the book actually looks. But, like, on a serious note, like, imagine that problem. Like, you walk in, there's no front table, there's no prize designations, there's no staff picks from your local independent bookstore. There's no tables. There's no, like, it's this publisher or that publisher, and you trust the publisher. There's no blurb. I mean, how do you go about that process, right? Well, I mean, then that any kind of decision there, it's like nearly like, I mean, you have to move to a world where you just randomly pull one off the shelf, or you're going to invest days to figure out what you want. Okay, and now take away social media and social influence, because the other thing about books is there's other forms, and all products is there's other forms of anointment, I'm on this amazing podcast, thank you, but that's a form of anointment itself, right? I mean, had many choices. I mean, I'm sure we like every publisher sends you every book, and you can't read them all. You're not going to. You must have this massive pile somewhere, and you have to like narrow it down. So how are you going to do that? And the fact that you do that, then takes the authors who are fortunate enough to get onto the show, and it elevates how the world sees them. So somebody may listen to this podcast and then purchase a copy of the book, but it's another form of anointment. Like for sure, there's some other author who wasn't interviewed whose book they would have liked a lot more. They just don't know about it, and it doesn't enter their choice set. But the general point is that the status process is a super, I mean, I call it like just the greatest shortcut. It's an enormous shortcut because it takes you from, I mean, like I think that's a good thought experiment. You walk into the bookstore and you just like, there's thousands and thousands of books and you have no way to tell one apart from the other, but you have to make a choice. Like that isn't the world you want to be in.
It's interesting. First off, in your book, I highlighted two sections in different colors, but one little short blurb: "The anointed shrink our decision horizons in a good way." That's what you said. I love that. That summarized this whole section for me. And the other one is anointed. The anointed do most of the legwork for you, and you gave two. Um, think of it like this. You said two things must happen before you make any consumption choice. First, you must become aware of the option. Second, you must perceive the option as relevant to your needs, preferences, or goals. And then you said, obviously, the anointed shrink the decision horizon for you. So, yeah, I definitely believe that you actually made it clear. Like, as I was reading the anointed, I'm like, wait a second. You're anointed. It's like you're making my decision a lot easier for everything else I have to choose. But you're also, like you said, with the New York Times, with the Wirecutter reader, it's like you just made me more aware of the anointed. It's like, well, now I'm second guessing myself. It's like, wait a second, what's going on here? So,
Well, yeah, so what a lot of the book then does is it reverse engineers this. So I think I mean, this is just a great way to kind of talk through like the whole thing that happens in the book. So take like if you just think about the process by which I got to this interview, like a lot of things happened before I got to this interview. First is I had to write a book that was probably published by one of the major publishers, or you were never going to find me. So that had to happen. Well, how did that happen? Well, I've never written a book before. So I got there because I have been at these, Berkeley and Harvard and Stanford and the University of Chicago. And I've been at these famous universities, and that is what allowed me to get to an agent who got me to a publisher, who got me to the book. But I didn't, and this is a central part of it that we haven't talked much about. In my view, I didn't really earn all of that, right? I mean, I got to these places because I have been anointed by the universities that I'm at. Because these are regarded as high status institutions. And because they're regarded as high status institutions, I must be, somebody who's going to write an interesting book, even though I've never written a book. And you don't actually have a lot of reason to think about that. So that all had to happen before I got to the publisher. And then when I got to the publisher, we had this kind of fun conversation. We had it like a lot, which is, should we be, would it be more ironic to put a blurb on the book or to leave it unblurbed? Right? Because the whole thing's about anointed, and in the end, Adam Grant and Jonah Berger were kind enough to write little blurbs, and and I sort of deferred to the publisher because this is above my pay grade, and I think those endorsements have helped the book out a lot, and maybe like that caught your attention because you've maybe interviewed one of those two, or you've certainly heard them on a podcast. And then you're like, okay, well, so now I'm gonna look at this one. So this is all the social construction of product quality, right? And then that got me to you, and now you're helping me because you're doing this for me, which is another form of an endorsement. And so in that process you can see this kind of cumulative advantage that the anointed have, and that's a central piece of it, which is like these status dynamics can just kind of take over and go and push you forward. But in all of this, maybe like the person who's the beneficiary of this hasn't exactly earned their stripes. And so in that sense, one of the other sides of this process that I write a lot about in the book is that it also perpetuates inequality, because you have these kind of cumulative advantage processes where somebody gets some kind of edge, a little edge, and that edge propels them forward in ways in which their actual underlying abilities are not increasing or changing, but the status, the buildup of status around them is changing.
You know, what's interesting on that, man, and I was thinking about it a lot because we've transitioned the podcast over the years. I ran Success Magazine's #1 podcast for the world. And when I was running that one, I was interviewing business owners and entrepreneurs. And I pivoted to just authors over the last couple of years. And when I was interviewing entrepreneurs, one of the questions I would typically ask is, how much did luck have to do with your success? And there were people who were like, dude, 100% I was just at the right time at the right place, and people helped me. And then some other ones would say zero luck. It's all me and my hard work. And every time they'd say that, it would piss me off inside. I was like, dude, you don't understand the world. And I wouldn't say anything, but I'd be like, and reading your book, it's like, that's it. That's why I loved your book so much. It's like, guys, you're not as good as you think you are. Like, you've been anointed and the world's falling for it, right? And you've got to catch up, and some people don't. So anyway, just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
And I can't leave that one. So I gotta run with that for a minute if this is okay. So my last couple of jobs, I spent, I can't remember how many years, 6 or 7 years at Harvard Business School. And when I was there, I spent most of my time running the core course in entrepreneurship. And then I moved to Berkeley and spent a little time at MIT. And in all of those places, I have been running entrepreneurship programs. And so this has been sort of the contextual locus of a lot of my career is entrepreneurship. And wine and art, but like take a startup and it's the same damn thing. Exactly. So let's just like, who are the like Silicon Valley, which is just been kind of the center of my world, is the most status driven place I've ever seen. Like it puts an art gallery to shame. Like, who are the anointers? Y Combinator? If you live in this world at all, Y Combinator, Sequoia Capital, the list of, there's, Andreessen Horowitz, the list goes on and on and on and on and on and on. It's the construction of social proof. So you take the same idea and you give it to two different teams who have different levels of status, and you're going to see completely different outcomes for the business, completely different outcomes. And you could level off experience exactly and know-how and wisdom and all those things, and you will see wildly different outcomes based on status processes. Like the whole venture-backed entrepreneurship world is this kind of high-stakes status game. Now, eventually, you see, like, I mean, it's not like the world has changed by the products and services created by these companies. I mean, for better or worse, they are in the process of changing everything, because this whole kind of AI thing is now being driven in the corporate world much more than in universities, as the as the level of investment capital required to do it has kind of exploded beyond, eye popping numbers. But so like the products and the services are incredible. They're amazing. All kinds of seminal companies have been created that have changed the world. But it's like the status dynamics that determine which of them get there and which of them don't, right? Because if you can't raise the capital and you can't build the teams and you can't recruit the resources, then you're not going to build a great company, no matter who you are.
That's it. That was very well said. Well, that's what I meant to say. Okay, since you said it so beautifully, that's what I meant to say. That was great, man. I agree with you 100%. So then, knowing that it's a status game, and then layering on social media, right? How do we play in this world better? Because we're watching entrepreneurs like Elon Musk who go in and now are very vocal on social, right? It puts them into a different stratosphere. Donald Trump, President Trump, on social,
So
different
weird.
stratosphere, right?
So weird.
It's like how do we play in this world where it's now even crazier than it was?
Yeah, I mean the the thing about social media is it tends to have this built-in reinforcement engine. Like it's algorithmically built in. So when something starts to go viral, it goes more viral, right? Because if you think about it, we now live in this world where the probably for most of us, the majority of what we ever seen is fed to us by an algorithm, right? There's some algorithm that's deciding what you're going to see, and it comes down to this. It's no different than the cheats. Like it's the problem is just at it's sheets at a scale that's like billions of times worse, right? Because in like how many how many TikTok videos have been uploaded in the span of the like I'm looking, there's this little timer up in the left hand corner. We've been talking for 36 minutes and 37 seconds. Like how many TikTok videos and Instagram posts have been created in the last 36 minutes? And they're like, it's like you and I could probably spend the next 7 lifetimes watching the content that has been created in the span of this conversation, right? So it's like sheets on the highest dose of steroids you could ever take. Um, and um, and so there is no way to actually sort of filter all of this stuff and look at what you want to look at. So instead what happens is some very smart companies with some very sophisticated algorithms feed us stuff. And one of the key variables in the feed is these sort of viral coefficients about like how much a social media post is being engaged with or viewed or liked or whatever. And as that happens, the algorithms promote them more because, of course, we want to see what other people like. But that just creates even more inequality in the system, right? So if you have high status in this world, where you're the president of the United States, when you say something on social media, it gets massive attention.
Of course. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, man. And I think there are people who are the CEOs, business owners, they've been playing that for a very long time. I'm reading 1929. I'm sure you've seen that book. And talks about how before Wall Street was even more regulated than it is now, there were people playing the game and trying to influence their way into making a stock look even more than it is, right? And so I feel like we're playing the same game on social with some of these CEOs and investors. And it's interesting to see whether it's their actual company, whether it's some type of digital coin, right? Or whatever it is. How do you suggest we maneuver through this, man? How do we do? Is it just being aware of all this more?
I mean, I wish I had the answer to that one, but 1929. I haven't read the book yet. I am aware of it, but for sure, like prior to Glass-Steagall, and if you go back to the 20s, the 1920s, and into the early 1930s, I mean, let's be honest, the stock market was a pump and dump scheme. I mean, it was like talk about the rich get richer. I mean, it was a pump and dump scheme and an amazing lesson on the hazards of over leveraging. Margin. I'm sure in the book, margin accounts must play a sort of a prominent role throughout. I wish I were smart enough to have an answer to this question. Like, we all live in this system, and it's really hard to live by different rules than the system.
Interesting, dude. I mean, yes, we live in the system. Even in your book, though, you're mentioning, hey, the system, the system is the system, and you want to make it like this altruistic system, but it's not. This is just you. I'm kind of rephrasing what you said. It's like you have to understand the world you're playing in, so that you at least know what you're playing in, and and I think that at least helped me understand as I'm reading your book, and going through the notes again. I'm like, man, this to me, if I'm looking, you live in the tech world, right? Berkeley, Silicon Valley. You sit on boards, AI, the most visited websites in the world: Google, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, ChatGPT, X, and Reddit, according to Wiki, top seven. And I look at that and I say, okay, influence, anointment. How can I use those seven sites or two consistently over a long period of time, providing value, so that I can have those systems anoint me? Right. That's the way I look at it. Um, how do you look at that?
Yeah, so I have super. I mean, so it's. I mean, I love the question and I hate it both. So because you're pointing to something, and I'm just going to be super upfront about it, which is there is apps you can absolutely reverse engineer the book and think about like, okay, well, I should be doing these things and I should be doing these things to become anointed. And
That's what I was
I will
doing.
tell you, I mean, one of the most essential things to do is to think about the construction of relationships, social
Yes.
relationships, because so much of the anointment dynamic. So, I mean, so if you just fix the world right now, you have some really high status people who are anointed, and you have some people who aren't. And as that world changes, it sort of changes. There are two things that can change, two like kind of mega things that can change, how you are in this world, which is one is you could be amazingly good at something and then you gain status because you're just so good at it. And it's not that the world is like 100% unfair. We recognize and value merit and people who are really, really, really good at something. And it's wildly different things, right? Because, to go back to one of your opening points, like, there's like, if you're like in an LA street gang, right? I mean, there's a status system in that street gang, and you might be the highest status if you're like the absolute best at beating the shit out of someone on a street.
Yeah.
But that determines kind of the status hierarchy in this.
Yeah.
So you might just be amazing at that. Like you're the toughest cat in the club. But or you could be like, the best chess player in the chess club. So you get status by being really, really, really good at what you do. But you also get it by having other people who already have it sort of place their hand on your shoulder and say, yeah, I vouch for this one. And that's the Wirecutter. And that's you inviting me onto your show. And and so you could think about that. Of course, there's also then in the digital world, there's separately, and this I'm actually terrible at, and I've spent, despite that I live in tech, I'm actually on the board of a social media company. I don't actually spend much of any time on social media sites and have no followings on them. Little time on LinkedIn, but that's it. And so I am the wrong person to ask about how you create, recognition of assistance, but
You just answered it in those two things you brought up, because if I'm thinking, let's go back to your example of the gang. if I'm the gang leader and I know my friend when we were kids, I'm his name's Joe, and I'm like, listen, Joe, just join the gang. I'll help you out. And then I tell everybody, hey, Joe's my friend. Don't touch him. Right now, all of a sudden, I just anointed him. And if I apply that to social, and I become friends with all of these influencers, right, in my field, and I maybe befriend two or three of them, all of a sudden they're going to be bringing me on, and people are like, "Who is this guy? He must be good at it, or this other guy wouldn't like him." So I think part of the answer, it's twofold from what you just said. One is, who do you know in the social media world that can bring you up? Number two, are you any good at showing up on social with the right things that people are attracted to? So it's a real world situation.
So let me take that and then translate it into one of the stories in the book, which the the book is just filled with stories. It is for two reasons. One is I think people find it more engaging and are more likely to remember the points if they emerge from a story. And then the second thing is it was just like fun and interesting for me when I was writing it to go, sort of chase down examples, which, in the pre LLM world, which is when most of this was written, was a lot harder. But one of the story that I had run across, and it's funny because when you write the book, you then go back and you figure out all these things you've heard, like which ones are actually true and which ones aren't. But there's this great story about Marilyn Monroe and Ella Fitzgerald, and it goes like Ella is at the start of her career, and I mean, like we can all debate quality, but we cannot debate the quality of that voice. I mean, she's off the charts. I mean, just off the charts. So when she's early in her career, she's trying to get into this super popular club in Los Angeles, and the owner of the club just won't have her. It was there. It was, to be honest, probably most of it was racism, but it was also, whatever. I'm sure there were lots of acts who wanted the stage, and so, but Marilyn Monroe had found Ella Fitzgerald and fell in love with her music, and they became friends. So what happened, the story goes, is Marilyn Monroe, who's like at this point, like well into her, her short career, but she's well into her fame at this point in time, goes to the club owner and he says, and she says to him, book Ella. And for the first week she plays, I'm going to come and sit in the front row.
That's,
So
I
that's,
mean,
so
that's it
that's like,
right there.
I mean, so that's like, but that's like, so, and that is one of the critical moments in Ella Fitzgerald's, eventual rise to true stardom, right? But as good as she was, like as amazing as that voice is, it's not clear that was going to carry her the whole way. She needed Marilyn Monroe, and there were probably a bunch of people like that, and they, record labels and record producers, and they all play the same role as the art gallerist and the wine critic and the venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. They're all anointers. But that was a kind of a story that just as you were walking through your comment, just like kind of mapped directly onto it.
Yeah. And I think now going back to your book, then the opposite of that story is the other story you brought up, which I didn't know about, which was Darwin and Wallace. I was like, there's no way. I was reading through this. I'm like, I had to read that three times. Like, that's crazy. Like Darwin didn't necessarily come up with that full idea, but he was given all the credit instead of giving some credit to Wallace. Tell me about that story here in closing.
Yeah, and so that's also a great one, and really gets kind of the core of the point. So probably for every scientific discovery, in fact, to modernize that one of the fun. I mean, they're all kind of fun, but at some point I read a number of the Isaacson biographies, and he wrote one of my about a colleague of mine at UC Berkeley, Jennifer Doudna, who won the Nobel Prize for CRISPR-Cas9, and it's a facet. I mean, she's an amazing scientist, and CRISPR is the other freaky technology that's going to change the world. That's gene editing, and what we're going to be able to do with that is I mean, bizarre, amazing and bizarre. But in any case, you read the you when you read the story, it shows kind of what the Wallace and the Darwin story, which is somebody's going to get credit for this because it's this massively important technology, but it was actually developed by a bunch of people. Um, and there were some close calls. History will remember the person who won the Nobel Prize. Darwin and Wallace is an even more extreme version of that because Darwin, for the origin of the species, which lays out sort of the theory of evolution and evolutionary ecology, is considered one of the all-time greats. Like it's Darwin and it's Newton, and he's up there in the in the stratosphere, the scientific stratosphere, as we think of him as maybe the greatest ever biologist, sort of like he's that. But when you get into the history, there was another guy you've never heard of, Wallace, who maybe came up with a theory first. For sure, came up with a theory at the same time, and the world's absolutely forgotten about him. And that's the sense in which anointment can be unfair, right? I mean, you have two people with equal claim to fame. Rarely do they both get it. Like one person is given credit or the majority of the credit, and then the advantages compound to that person. They become more and more and more famous. And then after the fact, of course, it was right to give them credit because look at all the things they went on to do.
Makes sense, man. That's perfect. Your stories were great too. I loved that you put the stories that were very memorable with people that we would know. So, but just didn't know enough of. That's why I loved them. It's like, oh, good job. Good job on that, Toby. Tell me what books do you recommend us reading that inspire some of the same ideas that you had in this book so we can continue that journey?
I'm going to now have to think about, so it's funny. I mean, I'm just like so focused on the books I'm reading now, and I've
Well,
completely.
what are you reading now that's really good?
I mean, so well. There's this novel that I'm like in the middle of. I'm in the middle of two novels. So I read a ton of fiction. I love it. I mean, it just like pushes me to think. And I love good stories. So I'm reading two books right now that I love both of them. One is Harlem Shuffle, and the other is A Short Stay in Hell. And they're both great, totally super different, but they're both really, really interesting, compelling novels. I'm reading Determined, which is Sapolsky's book on free will, which I've wanted to read since I've heard about it. So I'm kind of always there's always like way too many books on my shelf. But this one I'm kind of it's funny, like I should just instantly think about what to read. A lot of what I read when I wrote this book is I just went back to the academic literature that I love and I grew up on. And most of those are articles, not books, and most of them are much more dry. So so I'm a little bit reluctant to recommend.
Well, what scientific journals do you typically gravitate to?
I am so all over the place. So I first off in this I do a lot of stuff on AI now, and I actually I like nearly forget about the journals, and I'm straight up to the preprint archives, which many of the papers are on. One called Archive, or in the social sciences, one called SSRN. But the thing is that like it's moving so fast, and scientific publication remains an incredibly slow. The gears turn slowly. It's like book publishing. Like both of these are in need of a massive makeover in an AI first world where things are changing so quickly. I mean, I imagine like the book on prompt engineering that's about to be published, when prompt engineering is no longer a thing, but it was, a year and a half ago. And so someone wrote a book on prompt engineering, and a year and a half, 2 years later, it comes out when it's not a thing. So we need to accelerate these things. But I read a broad spectrum of like science, nature, scientific journals, but also sociology and economics journals. So I'm all over the place, but spend more of my time now reading like papers that aren't in publication yet.
That's awesome, man. And what AI do you gravitate to the most? GPT, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Perplexity, Grok. What do you gravitate to?
I mean, I don't use Grok, although it's excellent, but I don't. I use Claude, Gemini, and GPT, and which one, and subscribe to all of them. Which one I use kind of changes a little bit by the task, a little bit just by random mood, and then a lot by kind of where we are, because we have never been in an arms race like this. So when Gemini 3.0 came out for like all of a week and a half, everything I did was on Gemini. Then GPT 5.2 comes out, and then I'm like, okay, now I got to play with this one, and I do some things on Gemini 5.2. I still, I like the team at Anthropic. I sort of like the value system over there, and I tend to like the way Claude writes, so I never forget about Anthropic. So it's all, but it is,
Dude,
it's like hard to make a
so
recommendation, but
you and I are like this, the same thing, exact same process, dude. Well,
yeah.
Toby, thanks for being on, man. I appreciate it. A lot of great information. And everyone, please pick up the book, Anointed, Toby Stuart. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. Just pick it up. You're going to love it. And I think it's extremely relevant, not only for where we're at right now, but for where we're heading, because it really helps you understand the dynamic of relationships, and it'll have you question a lot. At least it did for me. So thank you, Toby.
Thank you so much. Loved it.